Plotinus Fifth Ennead, First Tractate, on the Three Primary Hypostases. Introduction, the Architecture of All Being. Plotinus opens this tractate by declaring that the whole of reality is structured in three levels, or hypostases. Each is distinct, yet intimately related, in a dynamic ontological order. The one is absolutely simple prior to being thought and differentiation. From the one flows Nous, the intellect, the first determinate being, filled with the forms. From Nous proceeds the soul, which moves and animates the world, extending into time and embodiment. These are not parts or substances, but modes of reality, each successively more multiple and expressive, but still deeply rooted in what is prior. The one, the absolute beyond being. Plotinus begins at the summit, the one to hen. It is beyond being, epikina tis ousias, beyond thought, absolutely simple, not a thing but the cause of all things. The one does not think, for thinking implies distinction. It does not will, for willing implies lack. It simply is, or more precisely, it is beyond is. From its sheer fullness, it overflows and thus gives rise to the next reality, Nous. The one is the source, the goal, and the center around which all being circulates. It is unspeakable, yet everything speaks of it. 2. Nous, Divine Intellect, the realm of forms. From the one proceeds Nous, the Divine Intellect. It is the first being. It thinks not in discursive steps, but as a single, eternal vision. It is filled with the forms, eternal archetypes of all that exists. Nous contemplates the one, and in that contemplation it becomes rich with intelligible structure. This inner life of Nous is being itself, timeless, stable, self-identical. Nous contains within itself the essence of all things, yet in their highest, most perfect mode, not as individuals in time, but as universal intelligibles. 3. Soul, the dynamic power that unfolds being. From Nous proceeds the soul, not by necessity, but by generosity and overflow. The soul contemplates Nous, and from that vision, brings life, motion, and order into the world. The world soul organizes the cosmos. Individual souls extend from the world soul, bringing intelligence into time, space, and nature. The soul is a double being. Turned upward, it sees Nous and participates in eternity. Turned downward, it forms bodies, governs time, and lives in multiplicity. Yet even in descent, it never loses contact with its source. Its task is always recollection and return. 4. The procession from unity to multiplicity. Plotinus explains this structure through the doctrine of procession, prohodos. The one, in its abundance, gives rise to Nous. Nous, in contemplating the one, gives rise to soul. Soul, in its motion, generates the world of becoming. This is not a temporal event, but an eternal structure. The lower depends on the higher and contains an image of it. Each level is less unified but more expressive. The one is utterly simple. Nous is unity in multiplicity. Soul is multiplicity seeking unity. The return, reversion toward the one. Just as all being flows outward from the one, so too all being longs to return, epistrophe. Nous turns back to the one in eternal contemplation. Soul turns back to Nous, recollecting its intelligible nature. Even the body, through soul, is shaped by form and participates in order. This return is not forced, it is the natural desire of all things. The soul, especially, must awaken, detach from the lower, and rise toward the one, through Nous, by means of intellectual contemplation and inner purification. 6. Ethics as ontology, ascent through likeness. Plotinus concludes that the ascent of the soul is not just ethical but ontological. The more a soul becomes intelligible, simple, and self-sufficient, the more it becomes like the one, and thus, the closer it draws to the source. This is the true goal of life. Not pleasure, power, or opinion, but unity with the divine. Philosophy is not merely speculation but spiritual transformation, the soul's effort to become what it already is and to see what it always already knows. Conclusion, the architecture of reality as a luminous ladder. On the Three Primary Hypostases, Plotinus gives us the spine of Neoplatonic metaphysics. The one, ineffable, absolutely simple, the source of all. Nous, Divine Intellect, where the forms dwell, thinking all things in eternal act. Soul, the dynamic principle of life, mediating eternity and time. This structure is not merely abstract, it is the map of the soul's journey. We come from the one, dwell in the world through soul, and must return by way of contemplation, purification, and self-transcendence. In knowing the hypostases, we come to know ourselves, and in doing so, we prepare to remember and return to that one which is beyond all knowing, yet is the source of all knowing. Plotinus Fifth Ennead, Second Tractate, on the origin and order of the beings following the first. Introduction. From unity, multiplicity must follow. Plotinus opens with a bold and beautiful principle. The first is perfectly self-sufficient, but from its superabundance, something follows. This following is not caused by will or lack, but by fullness, pleroma. The first, the one, is so utterly complete that it overflows, and from that overflow arises the next hypostasis, Nous. This is the eternal procession, prohodos, of being. The one remains beyond being, but it generates Nous, which is the first true being. In Nous we find the full structure of all things, the forms, intellect, life. The one does not think, it is beyond intellect. Plotinus insists that the one does not think. Thought implies distinction between thinker and object, relation between subject and form, a kind of movement or duality. But the one is prior to all relation. It is beyond being, beyond knowing, utterly simple. Its power is in its silent presence, its absolute unity. Nous arises when the one is present to another, namely, itself, and this self-presence becomes thought. Thus, Nous emerges by a kind of mirrored turning. It sees the one and, in doing so, knows, and thereby becomes. 2. Nous is the first being, filled with the forms. Nous is the first being to on, and its essence is thinking, but not temporal, discursive thinking. Rather, it is a perfect act of knowing, in which the subject, object, and knowledge are one. In Nous, all the forms, the archetypes of all things, exist eternally as aspects of its own thinking. These forms are not separate items, but interrelated aspects of divine self-awareness. For example, the form of justice is Nous thinking justice. The form of human is Nous thinking humanity in its fullness. Thus, Nous is pure intelligible life, the cosmos of true being, where every form exists as a living thought in the eternal mind. 3. Why does Nous contain many forms? Plotinus now addresses the problem of multiplicity. If the one is simple, why is Nous full of many forms? His answer, because the one is not being, it cannot be limited by unity as a number. Its very overflow is productive of differentiation. But this differentiation does not occur in the one, it occurs in the first being Nous. Multiplicity then does not contradict the one, it is the first echo of its presence, the first articulation of reality. And that articulation is always ordered, not chaotic. 4. Order as a principle of intelligibility. Plotinus emphasizes that everything which follows from the first is marked by order, taxis. In the intelligible realm, order means higher realities are simpler, more unified, closer to the source. Lower realities are more multiple, expressive, outward. Each level depends on the one above it and reveals it in its own way. This cosmic order is not imposed from without, it is the very nature of being. To be is to be in relation, and that relation is always oriented toward the good. The role of love and desire in being's emergence. Plotinus poetically suggests that the movement from one to Nous is driven by love, eros. Nous arises by desiring the good, turning toward the one, and in that act, becoming what it is. This turning of desire, epistrophe, is what grounds being. It is not a passion, but a metaphysical necessity. The first movement of life is the desire for the good. All things that come after do likewise. Soul loves Nous, and so it contemplates and creates. The body, though distant, still bears the signature of order and thus reflects love in its own shadowed way. 6. The hypostatic structure, being, life, intellect. Plotinus explains that Nous contains within it being as the stable presence of reality, life as the eternal activity of self-knowing, intellect as the unified knowing of all things. These are not separate layers but aspects of the same act. Nous does not acquire these things, it is them all at once. Thus, Nous is not only the cause of the cosmos, it is the true cosmos, the perfect archetypal world, the living image of the one. Conclusion, from the one, all things flow in ordered intelligibility. On the origin and order of the beings following the first, Plotinus gives a visionary metaphysical account of how the one, though utterly simple, gives rise to Nous, the realm of true being. In Nous, all forms exist in perfect order as eternal thoughts. This order is driven by love, reversion, and contemplation. Each level of reality reflects the one while increasing in multiplicity and expression. Here, we see the divine world not as a hierarchy of control, but as a dance of contemplative overflow, a chain of beings in which each level loves, sees, and gives in accordance with its nature. To understand this order is not merely to know the structure of the world, it is to see where we stand within it and to begin the soul's own movement of return through Nous to the One. Plotinus Fifth Ennead, Third Tractate, on the Knowing Hypostases and That Which is Beyond. Introduction, 3 Degrees of Knowledge and What Transcends Them. Plotinus begins with a critical distinction between 3 kinds of knowing corresponding to the 3 primary hypostases. The soul knows discursively through reasoning, images, and progression. Nous knows intuitively with immediate and total grasp of eternal forms. The One does not know because it is prior to all duality. This framework allows Plotinus to describe the ascent of consciousness from shifting opinion through philosophical clarity to silent presence before the source. The soul's knowing, discursive, temporal, fragmented. The human soul, especially in its embodied form, knows by drawing distinctions, comparing, moving from one premise to another. This is dianoia, discursive reason. It is always in time and therefore involves sequence and partiality. The soul does not grasp the whole at once, it reconstructs truth piece by piece. But even here, the soul has the power to rise. It can turn away from sense perception and begin to seek the eternal through philosophy. 2. Nous knowing, eternal, simultaneous, self-complete. In contrast, Nous knows by identity. It does not move from thought to thought, it is all thought at once. In Nous, the knower, the known, and the act of knowing are one. Every form is a living thought, eternally known in a single act. Knowing is being and being is knowing. This is the meaning of Plato's teaching that intellect and being are the same. Nous is true self-knowledge, not self-reflection, but total actuality. Nous does not look at forms, it is the forms. This is the paradigm of perfect knowing. 3. The One, beyond all knowing, beyond all being. But what about the One? Plotinus says the One does not know. Not because it is lacking, but because it is beyond relation, beyond duality, beyond being itself. It is not something known because that implies an object. It is not someone who knows because that implies a subject. It simply is, in absolute simplicity, and from this all-knowing arises. This is the most radical doctrine. The highest reality is not intellect, but beyond intellect. It is not the most knowable, but the condition for all knowledge. To approach it, one must go beyond knowing, beyond forms, beyond thoughts, beyond being. 4. The ascent from discursive thought to union. Plotinus now outlines the soul's path of ascent. Sensation, the soul engages with bodies, opinions, and images. Discursive reason, it begins to think clearly, philosophically. Intellectual vision, Nous, it enters into pure contemplation, grasping eternal truths. Transcendence of knowing, it moves beyond thought into silent union with the One. This final step is not achieved by reasoning. It is a reversion, epistrophe, a letting go, a simplification of the soul until it becomes like the One, unified, still, and beyond multiplicity. The One cannot be grasped, only touched. Not seen, but merged with. Not known, but become. The limit of knowing, why even Nous must stop. Plotinus then asks, can Nous know the One? No, Nous is the first knower, but the One is prior to knowing. Nous longs for the One, contemplates it as source, but cannot contain it. To know the One would be to limit it, but the One is unbounded. Thus, even divine intellect is turned toward the One in loving contemplation, not in conceptual grasp. The One is not an object in any realm, it is the condition of all objectivity. 6. Language, silence, and the final ascent. As Plotinus draws near to the highest mystery, his tone becomes reverent, poetic, and apophatic. The One is beyond speech, beyond form, beyond thought, beyond even the will to know. To reach it, the soul must be silent, still, and emptied of all multiplicity. This is not annihilation but completion, the return of the many into the One. And yet, paradoxically, the One is most present to those who let go of everything else. Conclusion. Knowledge is a ladder that must be left behind. On the Knowing Hypostases and That Which is Beyond, Plotinus maps out the full vertical structure of consciousness. The soul thinks in steps, it climbs. Nous knows all at once, it stands. The One is beyond knowledge, it is the ground of all standing. The journey of the philosopher is not only to understand, but to become simple, to pass from movement to stillness, from thought to presence, from separation to unity. In this vision, knowing is both the way upward and the veil to be lifted. What lies beyond, the One, is not something we can know, but what we are meant to return to. Plotinus Fifth Ennead, Fourth Tractate, How that which is after the first comes from the first and on the one. Introduction, the problem of creation without action. Plotinus begins by facing a serious philosophical challenge. If the one is absolutely simple, then it cannot act, decide, know, or move, for all of these involve multiplicity and difference. But if it does nothing, how does anything come from it? He firmly rejects the idea that the one deliberately produces Nous. That would make it a kind of intellect and thus no longer the one. Nor does it think creation. Rather, the one is so completely itself, so utterly perfect, that its very presence causes all else to be. Thus, being is not made by the one, it is the echo of the one's sheer existence. The one is not a being, but the source of being. Plotinus carefully distinguishes the one from being ousia. The one is not a supreme being or even a being. It is prior to being, beyond all categories, including existence, essence, and intellect. To be a being is already to involve determination, form, and relation. But the one has none of these. It is not this or that, but source beyond the multiplicity of the intelligible world. All things exist because of the one, but the one is not one of the things that exist. 2. The emergence of Nous, overflow as generation. How then does Nous arise? Plotinus gives a vivid metaphor. Just as light radiates from the sun without diminishing it, so too Nous emanates from the one. This emanation is not a choice or an act. It is a natural consequence of the one's perfection. The one does not move, but from its stillness there is motion, not in the one, but in that which follows. Nous arises as a kind of self-awareness in the presence of the one. It turns toward the one, desires it, and in this act of contemplation it becomes filled with form and becomes intellect. This is the first differentiation, the moment of being, thought, and multiplicity. 3. The one remains untouched by what precedes. A critical point. Although the one gives rise to all, it is not changed, not affected, not divided. It remains what it is, undiminished by what flows from it. This distinguishes Plotinus emanationism from any idea of divine fragmentation or expenditure. The one is eternal presence, not engaged in a process. All things exist in relation to the one, but the one has no relation to them. It is the silent cause of everything, and yet beyond everything. 4. Desire, turning, and reversion, the dynamic of emanation. Plotinus now describes the inner structure of emanation. From the one arises Nous, by necessity. Nous, in turning back toward the one, becomes contemplative and thus intellect. From Nous, soul emerges, again, through desire, vision, and expression. The soul contemplates Nous and gives rise to the world. Each level has 3 moments. Procession from the one or prior. Reversion, turning back toward the source. Self-beholding, becoming what it is through vision. This dynamic of overflow, return, and being is the secret of the Neoplatonic cosmos. The one is the absolute standard of unity. The final sections turn to a more abstract defense of the one's nature. It is the measure of unity, not one among many. It is not composed of parts, nor divisible by thought. It is not the sum of perfections, but prior to all determination. Even the category one must be let go. The one is not numerically one, but beyond number. To call it one is to speak analogically, to express its absolute simplicity, not a predicate. 6. The approach to the one, ascent through negation. To draw near to the one, the soul must cease to divide, cease to conceptualize, cease to affirm even being. The ascent is an act of negation, apheresis. Stripping away all multiplicity, all image, all speech, until only presence without predicate remains. This is not annihilation, it is the highest intimacy. The one is found in silence when the soul becomes what it always was, beyond time, image, and thought. Conclusion, the one is the still center of all becoming. In How that which is after the first comes from the first, and on the one, Plotinus gives us his most sublime metaphysics. The one is not a being, not a god in any mythic sense, it is the principle beyond all things. It does not act or think, yet everything arises from it. Nous emerges from it by overflow and soul follows by contemplation. All things yearn for the one and can return to it, but only by letting go of what they are. This is the climax of Plotinus thought, a vision of the universe as a living radiance of unity cascading from a silent source that needs nothing, wants nothing, but gives all. To draw near to that source is the goal of all philosophy, all mysticism, and all life. Plotinus Fifth Ennead, Fifth Tractate, that the intelligibles are not outside the intellect and on the good. Introduction, refuting the externality of the forms. Plotinus begins by rejecting the idea that the forms are outside intellect. This is a crucial point. If the forms were elsewhere, intellect would be dependent, ignorant, or incomplete, which contradicts its status as the first being. Instead, Plotinus insists, the forms are the content of Nous. Nous does not grasp them from outside itself. Rather, it is them. Just as the mind knows itself by being itself, so Nous knows all intelligible reality by being that reality. Nous is living thinking substance. Plotinus reaffirms that Nous is not passive or abstract. It is alive Zoe, self-knowing, composite in content but simple in essence, a unity of knower and known. It is not that Nous has a set of thoughts, it is the act of thinking all things eternally. Each form is a thought within Nous but also a mode of its being. Thus, Nous is not just aware of forms, it is the complete set of forms, alive, interrelated, and eternally present. 2. Against the separation of forms, unity within Nous. Plotinus warns, if we treat the forms as objects outside Nous, we fall back into material thinking, imagining intelligibles like physical things in space. But intelligibles are not spatially distinct. In Nous, all forms coexist. Each contains and implies the others. All are known together in one timeless act. This is true unity in multiplicity, a living intelligible cosmos in which each form is a moment of self-knowledge within a single consciousness. 3. Being is thinking and only intelligible being truly is. Plotinus builds his central metaphysical identity. Being equals thinking equals intelligibility. The forms are the intelligible beings and their being is their being thought. The realm of true existence is not physical but noetic. A realm of thinking substances with no gap between subject and object. Therefore, true being is in Nous. It is unified because it is self-knowing. It is eternal, necessary, and non-temporal. To exist, in the truest sense, is to be present to Nous as an intelligible content, or better, to be a mode of Nous knowing. 4. The one, beyond intellect, the source of all thinking. But now Plotinus makes his most daring move. Even this perfect unity of Nous and forms is not the highest. Above Nous stands the one, or the good. It is not a thinker. It does not possess forms. It does not know, for knowing implies duality. It simply is, or rather, it is beyond being. The one is the cause of Nous. Its radiance awakens Nous into thought. But it remains prior, untouched, unthinkable. Nous is the first being, but the one is beyond being, the good itself. The one is the source of unity in all things. Plotinus emphasizes that even the unity within Nous, the fusion of knower and known, comes from the one. Everything that exists is unified to the degree that it participates in the one. The more unified a thing is, the more real it is. The less unified, the more fragmented, the closer to non-being. Thus, Nous is highly unified, highly real. Soul is less unified, temporal, and diverse. Bodies are lowest multiplicity, flux, and illusion. The one is the standard of reality, the measure of goodness, and the goal of all desire. 6. The soul's path from discursive thought to noetic vision to the good. Plotinus ends by charting the soul's ascent. From sensation and opinion, to discursive reasoning, dianoia, to intellectual vision, noesis, the activity of Nous. And finally, to the one, where knowing ceases and only presence, silence, and union remain. The forms guide the soul upward, but the goal is beyond the forms toward the source of unity, being, and thought. This is the true meaning of Plato's good in the Republic. Not merely a high being, but that by which all beings are knowable, good, and one. Conclusion: being as thought, thought as unity, unity as the gift of the good. In that the intelligibles are not outside the intellect, and on the good, Plotinus offers a threefold teaching. The forms are within Nous, not separate things, but living thoughts in a single self-knowing act. True being is thought. Intelligibility is not derivative, but the very essence of existence. The good is beyond even being and thought. It is the ineffable source, from which all unity, life, and knowing arise. To live philosophically is to turn toward this inner cosmos, to become like Nous, and ultimately to transcend Nous in a mystical union with the good. Plotinus here perfects the Neoplatonic metaphysical vision. A world not of dead things, but of living intelligibles. A soul not imprisoned, but called upward, and a source not conceptual but utterly real. The one, the good, the beyond being origin of all that is. Plotinus Fifth Ennead, 6th Tractate, on the fact that that which is beyond being does not think, and on what is the primary. Introduction. Can the highest principle think? Plotinus opens by confronting a tempting but mistaken view that the first principle, the One, is the supreme thinker and that its perfection consists in knowing all things. This is plausible because Nous, the divine intellect, is perfect, complete, and filled with eternal truths. But Plotinus insists the One is not Nous. It is prior to thinking, prior to being, prior to duality. Therefore, it does not think, not because it lacks power, but because it is beyond power and beyond need. Why the One cannot think? To think is to distinguish subject and object, possess content, have awareness of another or of oneself as other. But the One is absolutely simple, without parts, without relation, without self-consciousness. If the One were to think, it would be two, the thinker and the thought. Even in Nous, where knower and known are one, there is still multiplicity within unity. But the One is before all multiplicity, even the multiplicity of self-reflection. 2. The One is beyond being and therefore beyond thinking. Being belongs to Nous, the realm of eternal forms. But the One is not a being. It is beyond being, epikina tis ouges, as Plato said in the Republic. And since being and knowing are coextensive, to know is to be, the One must also be beyond knowing. Plotinus states that to call the One being or intellect is to impose a limitation. The One is not the best thinker or the highest knower, but the source of all knowing, from which Nous draws its clarity. It is prior to essence, prior to knowledge, prior even to life. 3. The One as the source, not one among things. Plotinus emphasizes that the One is not a member of a class, not the first being in a sequence. It is the source of the sequence, the groundless ground of all that is. To call it the first, to proton, is to speak relatively, but even this is metaphor. The One is not first in time or first in hierarchy, but first in ontological dependence. Everything is because the One is not in any determinate way. Thus, all language about the One is symbolic, analogical, or negated. 4. The productivity of the One without activity. One of the core challenges. If the One does not think, will, or move, how can it produce anything? Plotinus' answer is radical. The One produces precisely because it is so full, so complete, that it overflows without action, effort, or intention. This emanation, prohodos, is not a temporal event. It is an eternal consequence of the One's absolute actuality. All being, all thought, all life arise not because the One does something, but because the One is what it is. Like sunlight pouring from the sun, being streams from the One without loss, motion, or change. V. The ascent to the One beyond knowing into unity. For the soul to return to the One, it must not grasp, know, or assert. It must cease thinking, let go of all content, withdraw from multiplicity, become one. The ascent is not cognitive but ontological. It is a simplification of the soul, a movement into silence, stillness, and presence. This is not annihilation. It is union, not by merging forms but by eliminating difference. 6. What it means to say the One is. Plotinus ends by exploring the paradox of speaking about the One at all. If it is beyond being, can we even say it is? He replies, only imperfectly. The One is, but not like anything else. Its being is not determinate but beyond determination. It is the condition for all other things to be. Thus, even the verb to be must be used apophatically, not to define, but to indicate mystery. Conclusion, the One is known by not knowing, approached by becoming one. On the fact that that which is beyond being does not think, Plotinus brings his theology to its final clarity. The One is not intellect, not being, not life, not thought. It is the source of all these, but untouched by what flows from it. To say it thinks is to misunderstand it. Thought is already too late, too multiple. The One does not need to know, it is beyond all need. And the soul can return to it only by letting go of thought itself and becoming unified in stillness. This is the final step in Plotinus' ascent, a metaphysics of radical transcendence where the highest reality is neither thing nor thought, but the absolute simplicity from which all things arise. Plotinus Fifth Ennead, 7th Tractate, on whether there are ideas of particulars. Introduction, the problem of particulars in the world of forms. Plotinus begins by stating the problem clearly. Plato said there are forms of things, eternal paradigms in the divine intellect. But are these forms only of universals like human, tree, or virtue? Or are there also forms of individuals like Socrates, the soul, that life? The issue raises both ontological and ethical concerns. If individual souls return again and again through reincarnation, is there an eternal template that accounts for each one's path? And how can the divine order include particular destinies if only universals exist above? Plato's writings and their ambiguities. Plotinus acknowledges that Plato sometimes speaks as if particulars had forms, but more often insists that forms are universal archetypes. Plotinus wants to remain faithful to Plato, but also develop his doctrine to explain individual identity across lives. So he asks, what exactly is a form? And what kind of reality do particular things have in relation to the divine intellect? 2. The nature of form, unity, eternity, and intelligibility. Plotinus restates that a form idea is an intelligible unity existing eternally in Nous, not subject to time, change, or multiplicity, the cause and paradigm of its manifestations. This applies clearly to kinds and species. Man, horse, triangle, beauty. Each is one in Nous, but multiplies into many instantiations in the physical world. But can this logic extend to individuals who seem contingent, changing, and historically embedded? 3. The argument against ideas of particulars. Plotinus presents the standard Platonic argument. Particulars are mutable, impermanent, and composite. Forms are immutable, eternal, and indivisible. If every individual had a form, the intelligible world would be full of accidental, temporary things, which contradicts its nature. Therefore, the eternal realm must contain only archetypes, not models of every fleeting event or singular thing. 4. The soul's individual path, a higher form of particularity. But Plotinus introduces a subtle and powerful idea. Each soul, though individual, arises from within Nous and carries its own pattern, a unique noetic content. That is, the soul is not a random configuration, it is a structured expression of Nous. Its particularity is not accidental, but grounded in intelligible difference. This means that while not every event has a separate form, each soul reflects a particular mode of divine thought. Its path through lives, through virtue or vice, is shaped by a logically ordered archetype in Nous. Thus, there are not forms of particulars as such, but particularities within the forms, and these can account for the individuality of souls. V. Providence and the role of particular forms. This allows Plotinus to reconcile providence with individual fate. The soul's unique pattern in Nous determines its character, its choices, its course of descent and ascent, its fitting place within the cosmic harmony. So while Socrates may not have a form in the way that man or justice does, his soul's pattern is written in Nous as a distinct modulation of the form of human life. This gives ontological reality to the individual not as a fixed eternal copy, but as a dynamic, structured expression of the divine intellect. 6. The whole cosmos as a unity of particulars within universals. Plotinus concludes by affirming that Nous contains not just abstract forms, but the totality of what will unfold in the cosmos. It knows not just man, but all the possible shapes human life may take and how these fit together in a perfectly ordered whole. So while Nous does not contain every passing shadow or accidental event, it contains the principles of all that is, including the archetypes of souls, the rhythms of nature, and the structure of divine providence. Thus, the many are present in the one, not as static replicas, but as living potentials fully integrated into the intelligible harmony. Conclusion: individuality has its root in eternity, but not as a duplicate form. On whether there are ideas of particulars, Plotinus offers a profound synthesis. Particulars as such do not have separate forms, the eternal world does not multiply shadows. But individual souls arise from distinct intelligible principles uniquely modulated within the divine intellect. Thus, individuality is not accidental, but meaningful, structured, and eternally rooted. The forms in Nous contain all possible expressions, including those that shape a soul's destiny through many lives. In this vision, each soul is not a copy, but a unique expression of the divine pattern, a musical variation in the eternal symphony of Nous. Plotinus thus preserves both the dignity of the intelligible world and the personal meaning of the individual soul's journey, grounded not in arbitrary fate, but in the deep logic of a universe whose every movement returns to the good.